Morning, everyone. 8 years ago, Doubleday published a debut novel about two star-crossed magicians and an enchanted circus. That book was The Night Circus, and it became a literary phenomenon, selling 1.6 million copies in the US alone and hitting the #1 spot nationwide. Not only was this book a bestseller, but it was loved. People festooned their bookstore windows in black and white tents. People threw parties in its honor. People wore Night Circus costumes. They invented Night Circus themed cocktails, and some people even got Night Circus tattoos. 8 years later, after The Night Circus, I'm thrilled to tell you that Erin is back with a new novel called The Starless Sea. This is a timeless love story set in an underground library far below the surface of the earth. The novel is a genre-bending dreamscape, steeped in mythology and lore with delights of imagination on every page. There are ice sculptures that speak. There are bees the size of dogs, murderous ladies in fur coats, spies in coffee shops, key collectors, men with owl heads, and more cats than a Murakami novel. Once again, Erin Morgenstern has created a world that her fans are going to want to live in. So, start dreaming up your Starless Sea costumes, mix up some Starless Sea cocktails, think about that tattoo if it's your thing. And here to tell you more about her novel is the author Erin Morgenstern.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for having me. Really, it's too early in the morning, but thank you. 8 years ago, we're going to say 8 years ago so much. It's a long time. 8 years ago, the Librarian Breakfast was Baby's first book event. I had never done anything. I didn't know what I was doing. Everyone had prepared remarks, and I talked too fast, and I actually read, and no one else read, so I felt weird about it. And Ernie Klein was there and asked librarians to shush him, and someone next to me said, "We don't do that." And now this is Baby's 5,812th book event, give or take, but it's only my second book event for the Starless Sea. My first one was at ABA Winter Institute, where they started me out nice and easy with a friendly chat with Margaret Atwood, and I realized afterwards that I had altitude sickness the entire time because it was in Albuquerque, and people kept talking about, "Oh, you have the headache, it's the altitude sickness." And I didn't have a headache. I just felt really weird and nauseous the entire time. It's like, maybe it's Margaret Atwood. Maybe I'm just having a reaction. It's just like, no, I think it's the altitude. So this is much better. You're getting me way sharper, even this early in the morning. I'm going to be better. I even took notes. They're not really legible, but they're notes. Thank you for the reaction to the Night Circus, because I think you couldn't ask for a better reaction from librarians, from booksellers, from book people. I was a very, very lucky debut author, and I think that makes the sophomore book a little bit difficult. What do you do next? And I really needed to kind of sit with it and figure out what I wanted to do, and what I came up with was I wanted to write a book about stories. And I started thinking, I'll do a book about books, because I love books about books. And the more I wrote, the more I realized I wasn't really writing a book about books. I was writing a book about time and fate and video games and a lot more than just books. But it is, at its heart, a book about stories. And this is going to sound weird, but I made them change the wording in the trailer because they called it an underground library, and Jenny just called it an underground library, but it's okay. But I never want to use the L word for the space that's in this book. And I was trying to figure out why, and then it dawned on me, it doesn't really have librarians. So it's not really a library, because a room with a lot of books in it without librarians is just a room with a lot of books in it. It would probably just look like my house, so. Where are my notes? I don't know. So, my first librarian breakfast, when I didn't know what I was doing, and I read, and no one else read, Craig Thompson had like a PowerPoint presentation of all this like beautiful art, and I was just like, was I supposed to do something? So I'm gonna continue a tradition. I have never read from this book before, and if you would like, I will read from it now. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about it first. It is a book about an underground space filled with stories, and I always have a place in my head before I know what the story of it is. I had this black and white striped circus in my head long before I had a plot to stick in it and a narrative to follow even vaguely coherently through it. A lot of the drafts of the Night Circus were not coherent. A lot of the drafts of this, Jenny will tell you, were not coherent. But I found my way through this story by making it books within books, and stories within stories. And the main story follows a guy named Zachary, who when he was 11 found a painted door on the wall behind his mother's New Age shop in New Orleans. And if he had opened it, it would have taken him to this place, and he didn't open it. And that's haunted him for years, and when he's just about 25, he's gonna find his way back. But what I'm going to read for you now is from one of the books within the book, and it's a collection of fairy tales. This is called The Star Merchant. Once there was a merchant who traveled far and wide selling stars. This merchant sold all manner of stars, fallen stars and lost stars and vials of stardust. Delicate pieces of stars strung on fine chains to be worn around necks, and spectacular specimens fit to display under glass. Fragments of stars were procured to be given as gifts for lovers. Stardust was purchased to sprinkle at sacred sites or to bake into cakes for spells. The stars in the merchant's inventory were carried from place to place in a large sack embroidered with constellations. The prices for the merchant's wares were high but often negotiable. Stars could be acquired in exchange for coins or favors or secrets, saved by wishful dreamers in hopes that the star merchant might cross their path. Occasionally, the star merchant traded stars for accommodations or transport while traveling from place to place. Stars were traded for nights spent in inns with company or without. One night on the road, the star merchant stopped at a tavern to while away the time before the sun returned. The merchant sat by the fire drinking wine and struck up a conversation with the traveler who was also staying the night at the tavern, though their paths would take them different directions come morning. To seeking, the star merchant said as their wine was refilled. To finding, came the traditional response. What is it that you sell? The traveler asked, tilting a cup toward the constellation-covered sack. This was a topic they had not yet discussed. Stars, the star merchant answered. Would you care to peruse? I shall offer you a discount for being good company. I might even show you the pieces I keep in reserve for distinguished customers. I do not care for stars, the traveler said. The merchant laughed. Everyone wants the stars. Everyone wishes to grasp that which exists out of reach, to hold the extraordinary in their hands and keep the remarkable in their pockets. There was a pause here, filled by the crackling of the fire. Let me tell you a story, the traveler said after the pause. Of course, the star merchant said, gesturing for their wine to be replenished once again. Once, very long ago, the traveler began. Time fell in love with fate. Passionately, deeply in love. The stars watched them from the heavens, worrying that the flow of time would be disrupted, or the strings of fortune tangled into knots. The fire hissed and popped anxiously, punctuating the traveler's words. The stars conspired and separated the two. Afterward, they breathed easier. Time continued to flow as it always had. Fate wove together the paths that were meant to intertwine, and eventually, fate and time found each other again. Of course they did, the star merchant interrupted. Fate always gets what fate wants. Yet the stars would not accept defeat, the traveler continued. They pestered the moon with concerns and complaints until she agreed to call upon the Parliament of Owls. Here the star merchant frowned. The Parliament of Owls was an old myth, invoked as a curse in the land where the merchant had lived as a child, far from this place. Falter on your path and the Parliament of Owls will come for you. The merchant listened carefully as the tale continued. The Parliament of Owls concluded that one of the elements should be removed. They chose to keep the one they felt more important. The stars rejoiced as fate was pulled apart, ripped into pieces by beaks and talons. Did no one try to stop them? The star merchant asked. The moon would have, certainly, had she been there. They chose a night with no moon for the sacrifice. No one dared intervene save for a mouse who took fate's heart and kept it safe. The traveler paused to take a sip of wine. The owls did not notice the mouse as they feasted. The owl who consumed fate's eyes gained great sight and was crowned the Owl King. There was a sound then outside in the night that might have been wind or might have been wings. The traveler waited for the sound to cease before resuming the story. The stars rested smugly in their heavens. They watched as time passed in broken-hearted despair, and eventually they questioned all that they once thought indisputable truth. They saw the crown of the Owl King passed one to another like a blessing or a curse, as no mortal creature should have such sight. They twinkle in their uncertainty still, even now, as we sit here below them. The traveler paused to finish the last of the wine. The story ended. As I said, I do not care for stars. Stars are made of spite and regret. The star merchant said nothing. The constellation-covered bag rested heavily by the fire. The traveler thanked the star merchant for the wine and for the company, and the merchant returned the sentiments. Before retiring, the traveler leaned in and whispered in the merchant's ear, occasionally, fate pulls itself together again, and time is always waiting. The traveler left the star merchant alone, sitting and drinking and watching the fire. In the morning, when the stars had fled under the watchful eye of the sun, the star merchant inquired whether the traveler had departed, if there might be time to bid him a proper farewell. The star merchant was politely informed that there had been no other guests. Thank you.